Hey, this is the World Advice Channel too. What I want to talk about today is a topic of why the go back to Africa argument that you hear by white supremacists all the time is stupid. And not just stupid, why it's flawed and makes literally no sense. So for this video, I'll explain in a very simple and straightforward way, not only why it's flawed, but why it's hypocritical. So now I mention that, let's get started. So when it comes to the topic of the black people don't belong in America, you guys should go back to Africa argument. The simple answer to that question of why that argument is biased and makes no sense is for two main reasons. The first reason is it's simply down to the fact that there's white people who live in Africa. And secondly, the fact that the West relies so much on African resources. So, why exactly does that matter? So, let me get into it right now. Well, the reason why it matters is that it's hypocritical, for that matter, okay, for people to complain about black people being in America, because of course, the stereotype, of course, pertaining to that is that we belong in Africa. We should stay in Africa, for that matter, to be quite blunt and honest with you. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes to that particular topic, you know, about us living in America, and apparently we don't belong. We should go back to Africa because that's our ancestral home. And of course, of course, according to the white racist supremacists all the time, we built this country. We built this country. And if we don't want you here, then you should not go back there. But the problem with that argument, the first point, which I'll get into, which I got into before, which I brought up before, is that what about all the white people living in Africa, for that matter? Because there's a bunch of white people who live in Africa, easily millions of white people live in Africa, who, if you actually looked it up, I looked at the history, they're known as the Afrikaners, uh, and are also not just Afrikaners, but are a mix of British descended people, while the Afrikaners are Dutch. But like I was saying, British descended people who actually, when Africa was a part of Britain, lived there. And of course, not only just lived there, but lived in the land. And of course, not just lived in the land, but also just claimed the land for themselves. So when you look at it from that perspective, how does that make any sense? Why is it somehow right for you to tell someone that they don't belong in this other part of the world, yet when you go to their part of the world, they tell, somehow those same exact people, white people, are somehow able to live there, and there's nothing wrong with it being there. Because that's the thing about white supremacists. They never complain about white South Africans and say that white South Africans, why don't you guys just go back to Europe? That's our ancestral home. You never hear them say that. It's never that. It is always, why don't you black people go back to the land you come from? In all honesty, whether it's in the Americas or, of course, in Europe. But when you do it vice versa, make that same argument, because the white South Africans don't even treat the black South Africans very well in the first place, and a good portion of them, particularly over a certain age, are responsible for committing atrocities directly against black South Africans. But anyway, aside from that fact, though, they just haven't accepted the idea of black people being able, uh, they live there, and no one criticizes them. No one says you guys don't have any right to live there. But somehow, when West black people go to other parts of the world, they're always crying and criticizing us and saying we don't belong here and blah 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 and all that type of stuff. So how the hell does that make any sense? In all honesty, and don't even make the argument that, oh well, that's because black people are not willing to, do what they're supposed to do as a part of society like everyone else. Because even in the past, when you look at it, and we actually were actually doing things and we weren't fucking around, look at what they did. Just like Tulsa, Oklahoma, they destroyed a place. There's even reports that it was actually bombed by jets, or flying war fighters or something, whatever you like to call them. They actually bombed the place from the sky, for crying out loud. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. And that's exactly what I'm trying to get at here. okay, for that matter, okay? Uh, so that show you. And look at Barack Obama. Look, he did everything that he had to do to prove himself. He wasn't a street gang member and this and that. And even when it came to him being in president, and he did had all the credentials, education, and stuff, and people still criticized him for being so black. So what does that show you? We can do everything that they want us to do, and they're still gonna criticize us. At least a lot of them. I ain't saying no, but a lot of them are still gonna criticize us. So what does that show you? So don't even make that argument. The truth of the matter is they don't want us to be there. A lot of them. I'm not saying the majority of white people are like that anymore, but a good portion of them say you guys should go back to Africa. But if we go back to Africa, then uh then why do whites get to live there? Why do whites get to go all throughout the world? Not just in Africa, but Australia and all these places, and you're still telling people you should go back to this other particular land, particularly if you're black, but they can go to other parts of the world. That's the first point I want to get across. It makes no sense. And the second part to also get across with the problem with the whole go back to Africa argument is that it's simply, of course, no surprise, just simply unfair in the plainest sense, is that white people are stealing resources from Africa all the time, for that matter, okay? Because even when you look at the electronics we use, even this the smartphone you can see that I'm holding, and I'm certain the smartphone you have and all that stuff, and a lot of electronics we have, but specifically for smartphones, it relies on a certain mineral known as cobalt, which Africa has the highest amount of it in the world, okay? And refrigerators and all these types of machines we have and technology we have comes from the minerals in Africa, okay? So if it comes from minerals in Africa and stuff, why is it somehow okay for them to take those minerals in Africa, okay, and take it all the time and still be disrespectful to us and claim all black people are useless and irrelevant, and Africa, for that matter, as a continent, is irrelevant. Um, the truth of the matter is, how exactly can they make that argument, and say, oh, we're taking the resources from your land, in all honesty, but at the same time, they're also telling us to go back to Africa. If we go back to Africa, if anything, well, let's how would it work for them if we to say, okay, we're now back in Africa and now you can't take any of our resources anymore? And that's another example of a bias here. Okay, so why is it okay for them to tell us to go back to land, but you take something from the people of the land that they belong to? That makes no sense whatsoever, for that matter, okay? So the truth of the matter is, simply put it, we should are it's okay for black people to live in America. This whole notion that we should go back to Africa and this and that makes absolutely no freaking sense. Okay? Not only does it make no sense because there's a lot of white people who live in Africa too. No one's telling them to leave. Um, Even though a lot of them, to be honest with you, should. And at the same time, they're telling us to leave Africa. They're telling us to leave America, for that matter, and the Western world, for that matter. Yet, what about all of the resources they keep on taking from us all the time? So it makes no sense. It's an unfair balance. If you say you're going to do one specific thing, like, because you don't want to have anything to do with these so-called savages, subhumans, as they refer to us black people as. I don't agree, but that's what they think, you know. Then why do you still have to rely on things from the same continent those people come from? It doesn't make any sense. You can't, this is not how life works. You can't just say one thing and go against another thing. The simple truth of the matter is it's biased, it's unfair, and it makes no sense whatsoever, what these people are saying. The simple truth of the matter is that they have no right to make those arguments. It's wrong, it's biased, and we have the right to live in a land, particularly in America, North America, for that matter, to be more specific. That's not even the indigenous homeland of white people anyway. We have every right to live there just as much as they do. So the simple truth of the matter is we can live in America, for that matter. Okay? Because the moment they stop doing those two things, which I doubt they're ever going to do, you know, that I mentioned earlier, uh, I uh, is then they can make the argument then, which I still disagree with, but at least they can make an argument because it makes some degree of sense, but they're not doing that, so it makes no sense. So in short, the whole go back to Africa argument makes no sense. And anyway, this is my video. I hope you enjoyed it as well as found it informative. And just remember, if you like this video and videos like this, remember to thumbs this video up and hit the subscribe button. And this is all I have to say. Simply put, I'm out. So bye.